Hello, everyone. First of all, I think, yes, we are live. Perfect. Hello, everyone. First of all, thank you for joining us for yet another live session of Canvas Space. And so today, uh, I'm Vignesh, founder of Canvas, and today I'm super excited to have one of my favorite persons in the US and someone who has been supporting me since the time even before I moved my base to the US. He is a patent attorney, Mr. Richard. Thank you, Richard. Thank you for joining our live session today.
My pleasure. Yeah.
So I I want to set the context for this conversation. One is one of the most interesting thing I have learned during this process of building Canvas. This is my fourth startup, and while I was building it, I think one of the most interesting thing I've learned during this process is the concept of IP and patents. And so I remember when we were just having an idea. Sorry guys about the noise. So I remember when me and Madan, we were just having an idea of Canvas Space. People around us, people in the media industry, they were like, it's a very unique idea. There is nothing like this which we have seen. And that moment onwards, the whole thought was okay. Everybody is finding it exciting. Everybody is saying that it's a very unique idea. Nobody has built something called a micro content monetization, and this was back in 2019. And since then, there were a couple of suggestions which are initial believers they were kind of gave us. One was to set up the company in the US and then look into IP and patents. And one of the key person who introduced me to this space was my investor and our advisor Anil Advani. And so Anil runs Inventors Law, and that's how I got introduced to Richard. And Richard is someone who's been a patent attorney for more than almost 16 years and counting. And he has he has done undergraduate in physics. He has a background with masters in statistics, and someone who has been working with all kinds of ideas and founders and startups for so many years, helping them have a firm grip on IP and patents. And that's something which from the day zero, the first conversation of our introduction, it was just me sharing an idea, and this is for all the founders, and this is something I think which is very unique, because we never think of our idea as a unique IP. We always think about, okay, idea, then we need to look into proof of concept and product market fit, and then we look into revenue. So this entire process gets left out if we are a first time founder, or even without the right guidance. I think this is something which we always leave this part out. And so this conversation I wanted to make sure that we have, so that over the last couple of years, Canvas Space, we have been able to focus on our IP, and we have 6 ongoing patents filed. And the whole patents is around Canvas and the proprietary tech of micro content monetization. So to give you a background about that, I think you can select any parts of your content. It could be a couple of seconds, minutes, characters inside a video, or an important paragraph of a written text. So I think that's the level of micro content interaction which we were focusing on, and that's what we had built through our proprietary tech of micro content monetization. And the best part is, you can lock it in any currency of your choice. It could be, in a fiat currency like a INR or a USD or any currency, or it could be a cryptocurrency, including NFTs, or even you can lock it just as by promo codes and forms, and any format where you can get your interaction with your kind of consumers in a new manner. That's the technology we have been focusing on. And when we started, I think it was a blue ocean, and it is predominantly a blue ocean still now. But even I think one of the key aspects before I bring in Richard is this is created a differentiator for us in the market. Today, over the last 1 year, we have been talking to all kinds of companies in the media tech industry, and we are a B2B technology. We have APIs, SDKs, and when we are going to all of these companies, one of the things is because it's a very new idea. The one of the easiest factor for us to get our foot into these companies, the big companies in the US has has been like, okay, hey, this is a very unique proprietary tech. That proprietary technology has been a huge factor for us to be even looked into, right? So with that, I would love for Richard to kind of share his thought process around what he thinks about the patterns with Canvas. What is the process and strategy which he had looked into, and then we will converge and conclude with topics around generic thought process around patenting and startups, so that anyone who is tuning in, you should be able to understand the basics of it. I think that's the crux, Richard, which I'm looking at.
Okay.
Let me Yeah. So I think to start off with, Richard, the first time, when we were introduced, what was your initial thought for this idea? What did you think about this idea when you heard it?
Sure. And I think it's very interesting that the convergence between what you mentioned is the kind of higher level template to follow for startups and our journey together with Canvas. I think there's a lot of alignment there. And as you're speaking, I had quite a few thoughts. One idea is, and Canvas is a great example of this, is you as a startup, you have an idea for a new product, and in this case, it's incredibly revolutionary because it's something that people utilize all the time, but they couldn't monetize. That's a huge issue with social media content, just creating podcast content, video content, etc. So when we first met and we discussed your idea, I thought this is an incredible way to monetize it and to have control of the monetization, right? So the product idea was going to take off. Now, how do we, from the patent perspective, though, a patent application needs to describe an inventive technology. So in your case, you have this awesome product idea. How are you underlying that? What inventions did you have to create technical inventions did you have to create in order to, or were you creating in order to have that product idea be successful and have good user experience? And so that's what we try to capture in the patent applications. So it's the intersection between the key product differentiators and the technical innovations. Because you can't just go grab current weblog technology and current NFT technology, et cetera, and off the shelf and throw it into a big bag and create Canvas. You might have built upon those as building blocks, but then you had to add inventive technology on top of that. In this case, because Canvas is a platform, there was going to be a plurality of multiple inventions working together. And that's very, very common too with startups, especially startups that are thinking big. So in this case, we began with what's called a provisional patent application. And what that is if I ever became director of the patent office, I would change the name of it. It's more of a time-stamped data dump at the patent office. So it's not a true application in the sense that it gets examined by a patent examiner. So patent law is a race to the patent office. Whoever files first wins the race. And that's who ultimately has the actual patent awarded to them. So it's nice so in your case, as a startup with lots of ideas, some of these ideas are going to be successful and some of them are going to fade. You're going to pivot away from them. And what the provisional enables us to do is data dump all these ideas that you're currently associating with your platform and with aspirational ideas that you associate with the future of your platform. We can describe where you are technically within it, with implementing those at the moment, and put those in the provisional. In a sense, it is just a big bag of ideas that you have. And this kind of goes to another quality of inventions, especially in the IT space. Inventions are really a process, not a moment. You have this idea, and you're going to be improving upon it for the next few years. So quite often, a patent application is really just a current snapshot of where you're at. And that fits in, again, to the model we followed with Canvas, in the sense that we have multiple applications that are, starting with the provisional application and then going to the first utility application, which was kind of a higher level generic version of your invention. And then we did specific embodiments that you unrolled as you improved the platform and developed it for through beta and for then when it was actually available to end users. And so that model that we followed with Canvas aligns very well with the model of the kind of more generic model that startups should follow as well. A nice flex. The provisional application provides flexibility because you're describing multiple inventions, and then if you pivot, what we hope to have is at least some technical description of those new of what you will take with you when you pivot in the provisional to get that earliest filing date. And that worked well with Canvas. I think it's because you kind of had a singular vision in the beginning, and it was more about how are we going to implement this and create the best user experience, et cetera. So that enrolled really well.
Perfect. I think you kind of clubbed my next question as well, which is the processes. And I think you are absolutely right. You can take the parallels with Canvas and the general structure of patenting as such. And so, from a founder's lens, what I understood, again, as Richard said, the process of provisional and utility, it gives the founder kind of a space to think about the specificality of that invention, to work with some, let's say, the kind of architecture you want to focus on, the kind of technical depth you can add to the professional, which will help you have a better utility application.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that's the biggest learning curve for me, was to take that time off, because that was very essential for us to also because it was a very unique idea. A lot of UI UX to how we ended up developing that architecture. The final architecture was, or the final micro content monetization engine itself, it took us time, and
Yes.
this was very helpful for our idea to begin with. And I think Richard kind of underplayed his part in that. I think we need to have, from a founder's another thing is an attorney who knows or understands the language, the technical language of what you are building. If the other person doesn't understand, what you're going to get is an average, or even I've heard from some of my founder friends, below average application. And in my case, I think I was lucky enough to get introduced to Richard in the right way. And he was able to add the depth, even more than what we had provided him. And he went an extra mile to study about, I remember, media engines, and add that extra layer. And I think that is also a very critical part, I feel, as a founder, to find the right person and make sure that the attorney understands what you're aiming to build, because it's an invention.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that is one part I feel, from a founder's shoes, it was very interesting and critical to have that right person as well.
Oh, thanks. No, there was definitely a synergy there between us. And in the beginning, because it's difficult when you have a true invention like you, or an invent, like you said, a blue ocean worldview of something new. We don't necessarily always have the current terminology for it. A year or 2 years later, you can always apply terms that you came up with, and looking back, say those fit perfectly. But at the time, it's as if we're talking about something that hasn't yet existed in the world. So yeah, that often is a challenge. One of the ways we go about that, again, is to have some type of generic terminology that does fit, but underneath that, in the actual text of the patent application, you want the technical description to be there. So again, that provides flexibility. So if you do update the terminology that you have for the product, we have that same wording somewhere in the application. So it's nice. It makes sense that later on, if we do update the terminology. But another thing that you brought up that's interesting is time bandwidth, right? And as startup founders, bandwidth is often, that's one of your most precious resources. So I found that's another reason to begin with a provisional application, because it can be a good enough approach, or not, and something that's sufficient to get your timestamp in with the patent office. You can follow it up with another provisional later on that has even more detail, that's an improved description of the invention. And then when you do the utility applications, though, those have to be best effort approaches. So, but having done the provisional, it saves time when you're doing the utility, because you've done 60-70% of the work already. So that works out well, because as the startup founder, it is good to engage with a patent attorney, see how someone else is describing your invention, what kind of high-level technologies and terminologies they're using to describe your invention, et cetera. And then at the same time, you get to come back and do another layer of updating on top of that, which is super useful, because it is an iterative process. It's an iterative process for each application. And then as you create the family of applications, you're iterating, and still always continuing to improve.
I think perfect. And in fact, when you were explaining, I had two questions to you, which kind of, one in sync with, I think, with Canvas. It has always been a software product, and growing up, I always used to think patents to be something, primarily for hardware, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then when I came to Silicon, when I started reading about Silicon Valley and the startup ecosystem here, that's when I understood that IP doesn't mean necessarily just a hardware. And can you share your thought process around hardware, software? What kind of companies should look out for patents? Number one. A subset of the question is we ended up filing, and based on the strategy we discussed, we ended up filing 6 patents, right? So how do we define the number of patents for an idea? Is there any structure around it? So these are the two questions I thought, which people would also like to know as well.
Sure. So one thing about hardware patents is that there's a lot more clarity into what the invention is earlier on. So if you have a new chip design or a new mechanical invention, a new, watch gear invention, et cetera, as a subject matter expert, you're going to have a better idea early on that it's something inventive, because it's probably some space where you're an expert and you are dealing with some type of hardware design that you have some sort of frustration that leads to a new innovation, new invention. You create the invention, and then that's what it's going to be. So you have the invention, you file the patent. Sometimes you may not even do a provisional application. You just do a utility application right away, and it goes to the patent office. The patent examiners, it's pretty black and white after the first round of review. If it's inventive or not, you may have to make some amendments and clarifications, but there's just a lot more clarity at each step of the process for the inventor, for the patent examiner, and for the patent attorney. So with software, though, because it can be a lot more amorphous, especially in the beginning, because what you do is you have this product vision, and then we are trying to identify the technical innovations involved with that product vision currently as you built them and as you will build them. Did you follow me? So your vision for Canvas was pretty set early on. Now it's the technical innovations is going to be a time series of events, not just like a moment where you create a faster, more accurate watch gear, right? You're still improving in Canvas. That's just part of, I'm assuming, right? Things are still getting better and faster and quicker, and the user experience is always improving, et cetera.
So, so in your experience, mostly the software ideas, ours, have you seen any pattern where it takes time for the vision to set up over a period of time? Or do you see ours, where because we have been very hell-bent on our vision since day zero, and then we started building it? So how do you see the pattern in the software side of things?
That's a really good question. So I would say, so sometimes we have a series of utilities applications that because we're chasing a vision that itself is always evolving, you'll have one utility application and then it's not adequate. Then we have to do another utility application to follow the pivots. In your case, though, what we see with Canvas is we have the initial provisional application, which is kind of like a shotgun approach. But then because the vision was constant, we have a series of utility applications in parallel, right? That are just filling in the vision. Did you follow me?
Yeah.
So it wasn't a matter, you weren't pivoting. What it was with now we're filling in the technical aspects of how you're innovating.
Perfect. And so now my first subset question was like, how do you strategize for a company for the number of patents to be filed? In our case, we have six, like, we have done
Right.
six. So how do you do that?
So it's one of those things. I think if you write a good provisional and maybe a good first utility application, it will just naturally occur. So it's kind of like when you get married, how many kids do you have? It just is a number that that you end up having, and it's so in your case, you have a broad vision, so you're going to have more and there's a lot of technical layers underlying it. So you're just organically 6 patent applications will fall out, right? So somebody else can be just as innovative, but we just stop with one application. It's just boom, it's good.
Okay,
Yeah.
so there's no structure to it, or there's no specific layer to it at all.
No, I would say most of the variance there really depends on the inventor or inventors, and also on the vision of the inventors and the actual product itself. So
Okay.
some products, one patent application just works. You're up. Yeah, you get the key differentiator described pretty quickly. But in your case, you have a plurality of innovations, differentiators in your product. So we have different applications that are focused on each one of those.
Perfect. And I think what I want to converge this conversation towards is like, when initially I remember you talking to Madan and me during these, calls, when we were in India. And when I met you, like even that time, I remember the first conversation was like, you sharing the kind of patents, because I was very curious. I was like, what kind of patents have you worked on and all of that. And I remember you telling it's going to be of a very different value, which you won't be able to see today. And that dialogue, fast forward, let's say
Yes.
a year and a half later, what I'm seeing let's say when I go to a media organization or when I go to a big organization today, that is the main factor for someone to let us in, right?
Mhm.
So my question is, what are the benefits of patents? Like, for a unique idea like us, because we don't have, when we go to an organization and say that, hey, when they ask for some kind of, hey, is there any product like yours? Then we say that we don't have a product like ours. It's new. So this helps for them to take a decision and what is the money they are ready to pay for us and all of that, right?
Right.
What are the other benefits or benefits of patents for a startup?
Right. So I would say the key benefit is it does dissuade potential competitors, and especially if you're talking to entities that can generate the product themselves, not just the venture capitalists, but actual potential partnerships with other technical companies. It dissuades copying because people. So when you have a patent application, you can't stop somebody. But what happens is later on, when you acquire the issued patents, you can get retroactive licensing fees, and you can get injunctions against them to stop them from importing, marketing, selling the product that's covered by the issued patent. So having a set of patent applications like you have motivates partnership discussions with other companies rather than just copying. And just kind of, because a lot of these companies, they have massive teams, so they could probably innovate faster once they catch your vision.
Okay.
Right. Yeah. So, but when you show up and as a startup, you have a whole quiver of arrows in your IP portfolio, then they're going to be more willing to just cooperate and team up than to steal and run with it.
Makes sense. So I think other than this, I feel one of the, from a founder's lens, the interesting part was it's kind of a validation in itself. Like,
Okay. Yeah. when you get the patent, there's a couple of validations there, I guess. One is when it's written, it becomes clearer what your vision is, right? Because you actually have like a claim section and you're describing your invention in the claim section, so people can read it and be like, okay, I can see how this company is conceiving its innovations. The other thing is when the patents issue, that's validation because an arm of the U.S. government with expertise in evaluating inventions has said we're going to give you a monopoly on that, and that's a credible amount of validation. Yeah.
Perfect. I think before I leave the end comments, it's a question which I thought of when you mentioned the U.S. government. Is there any country, because I see the patent laws are different for each countries.
Mhm.
Now, how does it? How do someone choose? Is there any, okay, of course, if I'm setting up an Indian company, I will aim for base in India. But if I'm looking at a global company, is there any strategy which you suggest that a founder should follow?
Right. So filing in the U.S., one of the reasons. So the reason to file in the U.S. is because the investor ecosystem wants you to file in the U.S.
Okay.
Because that's where you get more bang for your buck. If you control the U.S. market, you can indirectly control other markets. You may not be able to control Mozambique or Vietnam or something, but you can control Europe indirectly, or say East Asia indirectly, depending on the type of invention. So, for example, with this IT type of platform, having the U.S. having U.S. patents issued would enable a lot of control, and it'd be a large factor in differentiating you from a direct competitor. Because they would have access to the U.S. market. Imagine if Facebook couldn't be in the U.S., for example.
Got it.
Or some of the key aspects of Facebook couldn't be in the U.S. because it would be patented and blocking Facebook. But I think that's a pretty that I would say that's the main reason.
That,
And
that helps. No, that actually helps because again, a lot of people have asked me personally, "Hey, why did you apply for a patent in the US? We know you are a US company, but you are also having an Indian subsidiary. So why not focus on the Asian countries and all of that?" So that's one of the questions which I thought when you address, a lot of people would have that clarity. That's it. So
sure.
Richard, yeah.
Yeah, and you can still apply in those other countries too, but that's a long conversation. Yeah.
Correct. So, Richard, I think while I say the concluding points, I think one of the very interesting personal thing I like about you is your fascination for the history of India, the food of
Mhm.
India, the language. You even have an kind of inclination to languages. So how did that and you have, of course, you have traveled a lot to India. You know a lot of places as specific as in Bangalore. So how did that love for India has come up with you?
Okay, that's kind of a pivot, but
No, I
yeah.
just wanted, because that is one thing I always I connected so easily because when we were in Bangalore, you were able to talk about food, or let's say something specific about it, and your awareness about even the history of specificalities of what we would end up knowing, let's say a South India, North India, and the
Mhm.
nuances of each of these parts. That was very incredible. That has always been there in my head. How did that love for India for you personally happen? Any incident?
Yeah, so there's a couple of factors there. One is I'm super into Indo-European languages, so people don't realize that I tell people there's only one native European language still spoken. That's Basque. So the English language we're speaking now, German, Latin, Greek, Albanian, Russian, etc. These are all related to Bengali, Sanskrit, Gujarati, Marathi, etc., the North Indian languages. And they're one family. It's called the Indo-European family. And there's this a beautiful history there of that combines India with the West. I think was underplayed because of the colonialism. But I think now in a post-colonial era, we're able to look at that and say, this is amazing. It's it's not a unitary cultural entity, but what it is more of a spectrum that has a commonality. And there's even genetic commonalities they're finding now between ancestral Indian populations and what became European populations. Um, So it was something I would say akin to, say, like Indonesians to Manchurians in the East, right? There's a spectrum there. They're not the same people, but it's but 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 they're definitely part of a there's a gradation of the same people, if you follow me. Yeah, and so there's a lot of commonalities there. Like, for example, the ancient Indian or the Sanskrit word for honey. I don't speak Sanskrit, but it's madhu, right? And then honey wine in English, we say mead. And there's just thousands of these cognates and commonalities and things like that in the languages and more ancient cultures in Europe and India, which is just I just find that incredibly fascinating. It's a hidden history that kind of came up to me when I was older, and I was just immersed in it. Also, I really recommend books by an author named William Dalrymple. I don't know if you've heard of him before.
Yes.
But he wrote a book on the Mughal Empire. He's written. He's a Englishman who, or I think he's Scottish maybe, but he's very interested in like 17th and 18th century Indian culture. And what was interesting about the original British when they came to India is there's a huge issue with British sailors converting to Islam and just becoming Indians.
I think that's very interesting.
They would get off the boat and be like, "This is so much better than Europe."
No, I think that is one of the most interesting thing about you. Again, I think, guys, first of all, thank you for listening in. And in fact, I think this process of patenting has been super interesting. At the same time, it's been a great learning curve for me as a founder personally. And in fact, one of the best things about Richard is also that, like, he knows a lot of things. Like, the more, it's like a red onion, right? I always think, like, the more you get to know, more I get to know you, the kind of diverse conversations I would like, I have with you is very interesting. At the same time, for any startup founder, I think when you are finding what, like, with the idea and figuring out what the idea is as you keep building, I think patenting is a very interesting process to keep you grounded. That's what at least for me, this entire process with you has been a space for grounding myself. I bounce off the thought process with you, so I ground myself, align, realign, and then keep building. So I think that has been my thought process here. And Richard, I think I don't know if I've told you, the entire canvas, what Madan and I, when we started building, we wanted to build something very unique from India to the world, because we end up seeing a lot of ideas, being coming from west to east, and this was one such idea again. We wanted to see if, how unique we can build something, and, like, bring from east to west, right? That's the thought process. And I think without you, Anil, both of your support, I think this entire process of finding a differentiator for an idea like ours, and at the same time, this has been a very, very instrumental factor for a lot of these partnerships and ongoing discussions for Canvas right now, which is gearing up for a kind of a global adoption of this idea of micro content monetization. Wouldn't be possible without what especially what you and Anil have done for Canvas. So really appreciate for everything you guys have done over the last couple of years for Canvas, and a lot of startups I know which you are helping out. So just wanted to say thank you, Richard.
Oh, it's been an honor working with you guys too. I very, very much enjoyed it. Yeah, and look forward to future. That's the great thing about patent attorneys, is that we're stuck with the clients for a long time. So we have many years in the future ahead of us, Vignesh.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think one question has come up. Basically, I think we have addressed during the conversation. The question is, while early stage startups are building up, when is the right time to apply for a patent? Once the product is being built, or can one do it? Oh, once the product is completely built, or can one do it while it's being built as well?
Yes, you can do it before the product is built. So it's a misconception that you have to have the product built and in the market before you file a patent. In fact, that's probably a little too late. So you can file for a patent application once you can describe it technically. Perfect. Which is usually quite a bit of time before it's built.
Perfect. I think, Richard, lovely talking to you as usual. And thanks for throwing some light on patents, and also the process which you had followed for Canvas, SITS patents, and all of that. Like, I think it has come beautifully in terms of what we intended to start and like where we are. So once again, thank you, and thank you everyone for tuning in.
My pleasure. Thank you so much. Bye.
Bye.